I am Tyler Brooks, 31 years old, and I always thought family was about loyalty no matter what. My grandfather raised me after my parents basically checked out, showing me what real strength looks like in a world full of shortcuts. My mother was the opposite, always scheming for his wealth from afar. At the family dinner right after his funeral, when Mom inherited $66 million, she glared at me and snarled, "Get out, you bastard." My dad just smiled as he shoved me toward the door. I walked away without a fight. What they didn't know about the will would make everything explode in just 24 hours. If you're watching this, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. Smash that like button and subscribe to find out how my grandfather turned the tables on my greedy mother from beyond the grave. The clearest memory I have of my early years is the constant rain in Seattle pattering against the windows of our small apartment. I was 8 when my parents, Courtney Ellis and Patrick Brooks, started drifting away more than ever. They argued constantly about money, and I often hid in my room listening to their raised voices echo through the thin walls. One night after a particularly bad fight, Courtney packed a bag and left for a few days, leaving me with a frozen dinner and instructions to stay out of trouble. Patrick barely noticed, buried in his work papers. That's when my grandfather, George Ellis, stepped in without hesitation. He arrived the next morning in his old Ford truck, the one with the faint smell of sawdust from his construction sites. George wrapped me in a hug that felt like safety and said we were going for a drive. We ended up at his house, a sturdy wooden home nestled by Lake Washington, where the evergreen trees stood tall against the misty horizon. The place had a warmth the apartment never did, with its wide windows overlooking the water and a kitchen that always carried the aroma of fresh coffee brewing. He set up a room for me right away, one with a view of the lake and a shelf full of books on building things from scratch. George explained that my mother had loved staring at the water as a kid, dreaming up big plans. From that day, he became my anchor. While Courtney and Patrick buried themselves in their jobs, her in real estate deals, him in finance. George made sure I had stability. He built Ellis Builders from nothing, starting with small jobs in the rainy Pacific Northwest, where durable homes were a necessity. His company grew into a leader in sustainable construction, using eco-friendly materials that fit Seattle's green ethos, but he never let success change him. He drove that same truck for years and wore flannel shirts stained from site visits. Courtney was different. As George's only daughter, she expected the family business to fall into her lap one day. She worked at the company sporadically, handling sales, but lacked his passion for the workers or the environment. The employees admired George for his hands-on approach, like when he'd join crews in the rain to ensure foundations were solid. But with Courtney, it was all about closing deals quickly. I overheard George on calls saying she had sharp negotiation skills, but no real care for the long-term impact. Patrick mirrored her in many ways. He married into the family young and always eyed the potential windfall. Their visits to George's house were rare and tense. When they did come, Courtney's eyes would scan the sustainable features George had installed, like the solar panels or recycled wood floors, calculating their worth. Patrick would nod along, asking pointed questions about expansion plans. Throughout those years, I tried hard to bridge the gap with them. For my school science fair, I built a model of an eco-home inspired by George's work, complete with tiny solar panels. I invited Courtney and Patrick, hoping they'd see my effort. The gym filled with parents, but their seats stayed empty. George was there, though, front row, snapping photos with his old camera and beaming when I won third place. Afterward, he took me to our favorite coffee shop by the lake, where the barista knew our orders: black for him, hot chocolate for me. He handed me a small notebook that night. Inside he wrote, "Build with purpose. Tyler. The strongest structures weather the storms because they're made right from the start." We developed routines that shaped me. Mornings meant coffee on the porch, rain or shine, discussing everything from local politics to why evergreen trees thrive in Seattle's wet soil. George challenged me with questions, never dictating answers. "What makes a home last?" he'd ask, stirring his mug. As I entered high school, the divide grew clearer. Courtney and Patrick showed up occasionally for holidays, but conversations stayed surface level. They'd ask about grades in a perfunctory way, eyes drifting to George's latest company reports on the table. One Thanksgiving under the gray Seattle sky, Courtney pulled me aside in the kitchen. "You're lucky to have this set up," she said flatly. "But don't get too comfortable. Life isn't handouts." Patrick chuckled from the doorway, adding, "Yeah, kid, real world hits hard." I pushed back internally, but stayed quiet, focusing on George's presence. He never missed my soccer games, even in the pouring rain, cheering from under his umbrella. When college applications came, I chose environmental business at the University of Washington, partly to honor his sustainable focus, partly hoping it might connect me to Courtney and Patrick. I told them excitedly over a rare dinner. Patrick's response was pragmatic. "Smart choice. Green buildings trending good for profits." No enthusiasm, just analysis. Courtney nodded, saying, "It'll pay off eventually." George reacted differently. He drove me to campus for orientation, rain streaking the windows, and treated me to lunch at a spot overlooking Puget Sound. "Education builds foundations," he said, clinking his coffee cup against mine. "But remember, Tyler, the best leaders understand people as much as plans." That day, he gave me his old compass from his first construction job. "For navigating storms," he explained with a wink. Over time, our bond deepened through small traditions, weekend hikes in the nearby forests, where evergreens dripped with moisture became lessons in resilience. "These trees bend but don't break," George would say, pointing to branches swaying in the wind. Courtney's visits increased only when business picked up at Ellis Builders. She'd arrive with takeout from trendy Seattle spots, but her questions always circled back to finances. "How's the new eco project going?" She'd ask George, her tone casual but probing. Patrick tagged along, sometimes discussing market trends in a way that felt calculated. I noticed how they'd exchange glances when George mentioned retirement. One evening after they left, George sat with me by the lake, the water rippling under twilight rain. "People reveal themselves through actions," he said quietly. "Don't force connections that aren't there." I wanted to believe Courtney and Patrick might change, but patterns held. For my college graduation, George sat proudly in the audience despite a light drizzle, while Courtney claimed a closing deal kept her away. Patrick sent a text, "Congrats, busy here." That night, George gave me his mother's silver watch. "She wore this starting her first job," he told me. "Now it's yours for timing things right." As years passed, George's health began fading. At 78, his sturdy frame weakened from heart issues common in Seattle's damp climate. Without second thought, I adjusted my remote marketing work to move back into the house by the lake. The evergreens outside my old window still stood strong, a reminder of his teachings. As George's condition worsened, I dove headfirst into managing his daily needs. The doctors diagnosed congestive heart failure, explaining how the persistent Seattle moisture could exacerbate things for someone his age. I set up a monitoring system in the living room, tracking his vitals while handling my marketing clients from a laptop nearby. The house by Lake Washington felt cozier yet heavier with rain, tapping steadily on the roof, like a constant companion. Courtney started showing up more often, her visits jumping from monthly to weekly. She'd arrive with gourmet coffee from a downtown roastery, ironic given our simple mornings, but her presence always carried an undercurrent. One afternoon, as I helped George with his oxygen mask, she breezed in carrying a sleek briefcase. "How's the old man holding up?" she asked, pecking his cheek lightly. George managed a weak smile. "Better with Tyler here. He's got a steady hand." She nodded, but her eyes flicked to the company files on the coffee table. During those sessions, she'd steer conversations toward Ellis Builders. "The new sustainable housing contract with the city looks promising," she'd say, sipping her latte. "Profit projections are solid for the next decade." George would listen politely, but I'd catch his subtle glance my way, a silent acknowledgement of her motives. Patrick joined occasionally, his finance background making him probe deeper. "Have you updated the estate plan lately?" He'd ask casually as if discussing weather. To outsiders, it might seem like concerned family, but I saw the pattern. Their questions looped back to assets never lingering on George's stories or well-being. One evening after they left, George squeezed my hand. "Actions speak louder than visits, Tyler. Don't ignore the signs." I nodded, pushing down the ache of wanting more from them. Despite his frailty, George's mind stayed sharp. We'd sit by the window watching the lake's surface ripple under rain, talking about life beyond business. "I've no regrets about the company," he said one foggy morning, his voice steady. "But I wish I'd connected better with Courtney. Maybe I was too focused on building." I'd read to him from books on Northwest history or sustainable design, pausing when he'd share insights. "Innovation isn't just tech," he'd interrupt. "It's adapting to what the land gives you, like these evergreens soaking up the rain." On better days, we'd wheel him to the porch overlooking the water. The air carried that fresh, earthy scent after showers, and George would point out birds nesting in the trees. "Patience pays off," he'd say, handing me pruning shears for the garden beds. "Rush things and roots don't hold." Those moments grounded me even as his energy faded. Courtney's attentiveness ramped up as his prognosis turned grim. Dr. Hayes delivered the news in our living room, rain, streaking the panes 6 months at best. George took it calmly. "Then let's make them count." I reduced my workload, immediately passing projects to colleagues. Finances tightened, but priorities were clear. I handled his medications, checked oxygen levels, and spotted bad days, early shortness of breath, or swelling in his legs. A home nurse visited twice weekly, but most care fell to me. I converted the den into a workspace, staying close while he rested. Our discussions grew rawer. "The business needs heart, not just blueprints," he told me during a rare sunny break, sunlight glinting off the lake. That's where Courtney falls short. When tired, I'd play audio of local podcasts on green building ones he'd enjoyed. Patrick began tagging along more, bringing high-end meals from Seattle's food scene that George could hardly touch. "Keeping him connected to the world," Patrick claimed when I questioned the stress. But their talks inevitably shifted to operations. "The eco-certification for the downtown project is almost done," Courtney would mention. George humored them, but afterward he'd turn to me. "Call Frank Larson, time to review some documents." Frank had been George's lawyer for decades, a trusted ally in navigating Seattle's building regulations. The older man arrived promptly, briefcase in hand, and they spent hours in the study behind closed doors. I waited outside, respecting the privacy, though curiosity gnawed. When Frank emerged, he clapped my shoulder. "Your grandfather's as sharp as ever, Tyler. He's got things covered." That night, George seemed lighter. "Promise you'll follow your path, not theirs," he whispered as I adjusted his blankets. "And don't fret about tomorrow, I've arranged what you need." I took it as emotional guidance, not literal. As weeks blurred, Courtney and Patrick visited almost daily. They'd bring company reports for George to skim, ignoring Dr. Hayes's warnings about rest. "He built this, staying involved keeps him going," Courtney insisted. I overheard George telling Frank on the phone, "She needs a lesson. This is how." The final days hit suddenly. George grew bedbound, his breathing labored even with support. I slept on a chair nearby, holding his hand through nights of steady rain. Patrick hovered more, his concern laced with questions about timelines. On George's last evening, as Courtney stepped out for a call, he beckoned me close. "Remember, Tyler, family isn't always who you expect." His grip tightened. "Truth finds its way." George Ellis passed at dawn, the lake outside calm under a light mist. I sat there, the silence broken only by distant rain, before calling the nurse, then Courtney. She arrived composed, Patrick trailing. After the doctor left, Courtney immediately rifled through drawers. "Where's the will copy?" she demanded. Patrick coordinated with the funeral home, efficiently treating it like a business closure. No shared grief, just logistics. The funeral came under overcast skies, fitting Seattle's mood. Ellis Builders shut down in respect, and the venue overflowed with colleagues who'd benefited from George's fair practices. I wore a simple suit he'd approved years back. Courtney arrived with her assistant, noting attendees like potential contacts. The service packed the hall, people sharing tales of George's integrity and sustainable builds. Patrick spoke first, his eulogy polished. "George pioneered green construction, securing our future in this market. No personal warmth, just achievements." When my turn came, I spoke from the podium about his real legacy. He measured success in lives improved, not contracts won. I recounted porch talks and garden lessons under rain. Afterward, Frank approached. "Fine words, Tyler. The will readings tomorrow at 2 at the house. Be on time." Courtney overheard and inserted herself. "I've cleared my day. Transfer docs ready?" Frank's tone stayed neutral. "Everything pertinent will be there, Mrs. Brooks." The reception back at the house featured catered spreads amid the wooden beams and lake views. I mingled, accepting condolences, while Courtney networked with executives, whispering about transitions. By evening, only Courtney, Patrick, and I remained. As I cleared plates, Courtney said abruptly, "Start packing tonight. After tomorrow, we're moving in. This place suits the CEO." I paused. "But it's been home since childhood." Patrick cut in coldly. "As George's guest, the estate passes to us now. Find your own spot." Sleep evaded me that night. Rain drumming on the roof, memories flooding of George's steady presence. Rain pelted the windows of the wooden house by Lake Washington as we gathered for the family dinner after George's funeral. The air inside felt heavy, not just from the Seattle damp, but from the tension around the dining table. Courtney sat at the head, her posture rigid, already acting like the new owner. Patrick leaned back in his chair, scrolling through his phone while I pushed food around my plate, the weight of the day pressing on my chest. Frank Larson, the lawyer, arrived promptly with a thick folder. "Let's proceed with the initial reading of George Ellis's will," he announced, voice steady. The room quieted as he flipped through pages. He outlined minor bequests, first donations to local environmental groups, bonuses for loyal Ellis Builders staff. Then he reached the main clause. "To my daughter, Courtney Ellis Brooks, I leave Ellis Builders and all its holdings valued at approximately $66 million, along with this residence and its contents." Courtney's lips curved into a sharp smile, her eyes gleaming. Patrick set his phone down, nodding approvingly. The executives around the table murmured congratulations, but their glances darted to me, uneasy. I sat still, hands gripping my napkin. I'd never counted on an inheritance, but being entirely overlooked stung like a fresh wound. Frank closed the folder. "That covers the primary provisions. I'll provide full copies for review." Courtney stood, brushing her hands as if dusting off the matter. "No need for the fine print, Frank. It's clear enough." She turned to me, her tone ice cold. "Tyler, you're done here. Get out, you bastard." The word hit like a slap, the room freezing. Patrick smirked, rising to open the front door. "Time to move on, kid," he said, gesturing me out. The insult burned, hinting at some buried secret about my place in the family, but I had no time to process. I grabbed my coat, the rain louder now, and walked out without a word. Patrick practically pushed me across the threshold, his smile lingering as the door clicked shut. The evergreens outside swayed in the storm, their shadows blurring through my shock. I drove to a modest hotel near Pike Place Market, its neon sign flickering in the wet night. The room was basic, with plain beige walls and a stiff bed, a far cry from the warm wood of George's house. I dropped my bag, the weight of Courtney's words, and Patrick's betrayal sinking in. Why bastard? Was it just cruelty or something deeper, a truth about my origins I'd never been told? The thought gnawed, but grief for George overpowered it. I pulled out my phone and called Amber Reed, my closest friend from college who lived across town in Capitol Hill. "Can I crash with you for a bit?" I asked, voice tight. "Just need a place to figure things out." Her response was immediate. "Of course, Tyler. What happened?" I swallowed hard. "I'll tell you in person. It's a mess." She offered to meet me the next day, promising coffee and a spare room. Sitting on the edge of the hotel bed, I stared out at the city lights reflecting off wet streets. My savings were thin after months of reduced work caring for George. Seattle's rental market was brutal. Studio apartments started at $2,000 a month, out of reach, without a plan. I tried to sleep, but the rain's steady drum kept me awake, memories of George's lake house flashing like a reel. The creak of its floors, the smell of his coffee, the way he'd point out herons by the water, all gone in a single night. By morning, exhaustion hit hard. I showered, threw on yesterday's clothes, and checked my phone. A few texts from colleagues who'd attended the funeral offering condolences sat unanswered. I couldn't face explaining yet. Instead, I scrolled through rental listings, each price tag a reminder of how precarious things had become. My marketing business had taken a hit while I focused on George, and rebuilding would take months. Around noon, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, expecting a spam call, but something urged me to pick up. "Tyler Brooks." A woman asked, her tone professional. "This is Susan from Frank Larson's office. He needs to see you today at 3 regarding your grandfather's estate. It's urgent." My pulse quickened. "Did he say what for?" I asked. "Only that it's critical and can't wait," she replied. I agreed to the meeting, mind racing. Was there a small bequest George left me, a keepsake, maybe his compass or watch, or was it just paperwork to finalize my eviction? The law office was downtown, a sleek building with glass walls reflecting Seattle's gray sky. I parked and walked in the damp chill, clinging to my jacket, unsure what awaited, but bracing for more bad news. I stepped into Frank Larson's office, the downtown Seattle skyline muted through rain-streaked windows. The room smelled of polished wood and old books, a contrast to the sterile hotel I'd left. Frank rose from his desk, his face warmer than at the dinner. "Tyler, thanks for coming so quickly," he said, motioning to a leather chair. "It's been a rough day, I imagine." I nodded, throat tight. "Courtney had me escorted out last night. Called me a bastard." Frank's brow furrowed, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Did she? That's telling." He pulled a blue-bound document from his desk. "Did Courtney or Patrick even glance at the full will after the reading?" I shook my head. "Courtney said she got the gist. Told me to pack and go." Frank leaned back, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "That's the Courtney I know, always rushing past details." He adjusted his glasses and opened the document to a marked page. "George and I spent months refining this will, especially as his health declined. The inheritance to Courtney was conditional." My heart skipped. "Conditional how?" Frank cleared his throat, reading aloud. "The bequest to my daughter, Courtney Ellis Brooks, is contingent upon her providing lifetime support for my grandson, Tyler Brooks, including residence at the family home, a monthly stipend of $12,000, and coverage of all educational and medical expenses." He paused, letting it sink in. Should Courtney fail to meet these terms or cause Tyler significant distress, the entirety of the estate, including Ellis Builders and all assets, transfers immediately to Tyler. I stared, mind reeling. "But she kicked me out less than a day after the reading." Frank's eyes glinted. "Exactly. By evicting you, she violated the core condition." He removed his glasses. "As of this morning, you are the sole owner of Ellis Builders, the Lake Washington house, and all associated holdings valued at $66 million. The words hit like a shockwave. "That can't be right," I stammered. "There's got to be a mistake." Frank shook his head. "No mistake. George knew Courtney better than anyone. He told me she'd show her true colors within days, maybe hours. He was spot on. I gripped the chair, processing. Why not just give it to me outright? Frank's expression softened. George wanted to give her one last chance to be the mother she never was. But he ensured you'd be protected if she failed. Does Courtney know? I asked. Frank chuckled dryly. Not yet. She was too busy claiming victory to read the fine print. Her reaction will be something. He slid a business card across the desk. This is the contact for the estate's security firm. You might want them at the house this afternoon to update the locks. I left the office, the city's gray drizzle feeling different, like it was washing away yesterday's despair. I called the security company, arranging a 5 o'clock meet at the lake house. My stomach knotted at the thought of facing Courtney and Patrick, but this was my home now. George had made sure of it. The security team arrived in a van as rain softened to a mist. Courtney's car was still in the driveway, a sleek Audi gleaming under the evergreens. I showed the lead officer, a calm man named Harris, the paperwork Frank provided. Ownership has transferred to me, I explained. He nodded professionally. We'll need to inform the current occupants. Courtney answered the door, her face twisting when she saw me with 3 uniformed officers. What the hell is this, Tyler? She snapped. Harris stepped forward. Ma'am, we're here to update security protocols for the new owner, Tyler Brooks. Courtney's jaw dropped. New owner? That's absurd. I inherited this house yesterday. I met her gaze. You might want to call Frank Larson. There was a condition you broke when you threw me out. Her eyes narrowed. What condition? Patrick appeared behind her, his smirk gone. What's he talking about? He demanded. Let's discuss inside, I said, keeping my voice even. The officers stayed in the foyer, focused on their task as we moved to the dining room. George's will required you to support me, housing stipend, everything, I said. You violated it in less than 24 hours. Courtney's face paled. That's impossible. Frank would have said something. It was in the full document you didn't read, I replied. We have a meeting with him tomorrow at 10 to settle this. Harris knocked lightly, entering. Locks are updated, Mr. Brooks. Here are the new keys. I took them, their weight grounding me. Courtney stared, her voice shaky. This is my house. Not anymore, I said simply. Patrick's eyes darted between us, his usual confidence cracking. You're stealing what's ours, he accused, but it sounded hollow. I didn't do this, I said. You did. Frank had arranged for us to view messages George left. He recorded them 2 months ago, he'd told me. He insisted you and Courtney watch together. That night, I stayed at the house, sleeping in my old room. The lake's quiet ripples outside felt like George's presence. By morning, I drove to Frank's office, nerves tight but resolve firm. At 10, Courtney and Patrick arrived with Victor Hayes, their lawyer, a man in a crisp suit. Frank greeted them coolly. This is a family matter, as George specified. Legal counsel won't alter the outcome. Courtney sat across from me, her composure forced. This is a misunderstanding, Tyler, she began. We can work it out. Maybe you stay in a guest room. Frank cut in. No misunderstanding. The terms were clear, and you breached them. He dimmed the lights and started George's video. My grandfather's face filled the screen, frail but piercing. Courtney, he began, if you're watching this, you've done what I feared, cast Tyler aside the moment you thought the money was yours. Courtney shifted, her face tight. You've chased wealth over family your whole life, George continued. I gave you one final test, care for your son. You failed in a day. Victor scribbled notes, but Courtney's eyes stayed glued to the screen. Ellis Builders and the house now belong to Tyler, George said. This isn't punishment, it's what you chose. The video ended, silence heavy. Frank started another, this one for me. Tyler, George said, his voice warm. You've shown what family means by standing by me. The company's yours now. Lead with the heart Courtney never had. Tears stung my eyes, not from sadness but gratitude. Frank turned on the lights. George left one last letter for both of you. He read it aloud. Courtney could earn a role in the company after 2 years of genuine effort, but only at my discretion. Courtney's face hardened, her mask slipping. This can't be legal, she said, voice low. Frank replied calmly, it's airtight. You violated the terms and the transfer to Tyler is complete. I looked at her, the woman who'd called me a bastard. George gave you a chance, I said. You threw it away. The officers escorted them out as Courtney's protests faded into the rain. The rain had eased to a drizzle as I settled into the Lake Washington house, now legally mine. The wooden floors creaked under my steps, echoing George's presence in every corner. Taking over Ellis Builders felt daunting, but his words from the video lead with heart kept me grounded. I dove into the role meeting with the executive team the next morning in their downtown Seattle office. The glass-walled boardroom overlooked the Puget Sound, where ferries cut through the misty water. The department heads, a mix of veterans who'd worked with George for decades, walked me through active projects, sustainable condos in Capitol Hill, a green community center in Fremont. I leaned on my marketing background, suggesting digital campaigns to highlight our eco-friendly builds, which Seattle's environmentally conscious market ate up. The team was skeptical at first, used to Courtney's profit-driven style, but my focus on George's values, quality over quick cash, earned their nod. Brian Caldwell, a key client for a waterfront eco-hotel, met me personally. George always prioritized trust, he said over coffee at a Belltown cafe. You've got his instincts. I spent nights studying industry reports, learning the nuances of green certifications and modular construction. The company's foundation was solid thanks to George's foresight, but I pushed for innovation, solar integrated designs, and partnerships with local startups. Within weeks, we landed a contract for a net-zero office complex, boosting our reputation. The Seattle Times ran a piece on the transition, calling me the new face of sustainable building. I pinned it to my office wall, a reminder of George's belief in me. Courtney and Patrick didn't take the loss quietly. They hired Victor Hayes to contest the will, claiming the conditional clause was unenforceable. Frank Larson had warned me about the no contest clause George included. Any challenge would void their chance at future involvement. The case went to a King County court, a sleek building near Pioneer Square. I sat in the gallery, rain tapping the windows, as Victor argued Courtney's emotional distress excused her actions. The judge wasn't swayed. The terms were clear, she ruled. The estate transfer to Tyler Brooks stands. The defeat hit them hard. Courtney's real estate ventures, heavily leveraged on expected inheritance, collapsed under debt. Creditors circled, and her reputation in Seattle's tight-knit business scene tanked. Patrick, tied to her financially, faced his own fallout. Their marriage, already strained, unraveled in a messy divorce filing common in Washington state when money disputes turn personal. Court records showed Patrick moved out, leaving Courtney in a rented condo downtown, a far cry from the lake house. I kept tabs through industry gossip, not out of spite, but necessity. Courtney tried reaching out once, showing up unannounced at the house with a bottle of Washington wine. We should talk, Tyler, she said, standing in the drizzle by the evergreens. Her tone was softer, rehearsed. Family deserves second chances. I invited her in, but kept my distance, pouring coffee instead of opening her gift. What do you want to discuss? I asked, knowing the answer. She pivoted quickly. The eco-hotel project could use my sales expertise. I closed deals George never could. Her eyes betrayed her, still calculating. I shook my head. The project's handled. Brian trusts the current team. She pressed, mentioning past favors she'd done for George, but it felt like a script. After 30 minutes, she left, promising to call. She didn't. Patrick tried a different angle, emailing about a family meeting to discuss my leadership. I've got experience you need, he wrote, attaching a resume, like I was hiring him. I didn't respond. Their attempts grew desperate. Courtney leaked a story to a local blog hinting at unfair estate handling, But it backfired when employees publicly backed me, citing George's trust. The scandal painted her as grasping further, sinking her credibility. Months passed and Ellis Builders thrived. I launched the George Ellis Foundation, funding trade scholarships for low-income youth in Seattle, honoring his belief in opportunity. The announcement drew crowds at a waterfront event with local leaders praising our community focus. Courtney showed up uninvited, lingering near reporters trying to tie herself to the initiative. I let her, focusing on the kids we'd help, not her games. By summer, the company's revenue climbed and I felt steady in my role. The house by the lake became my sanctuary, its evergreen view a daily reminder of George's lessons. I hired a manager to maintain the garden, keeping the trees he loved pristine. Amber, my friend, visited often, bringing coffee and perspective. "You're building something real," she said one evening, watching the sunset over the water. "George would be proud." Courtney's final move came via a voicemail. Her voice strained. "Tyler, I'm in trouble. Legal fees, debts. Can we meet?" I deleted it, unmoved. Patrick's call came next, late one night. His tone panicked. I let it go to voicemail, sensing what was coming. Patrick's voicemail lingered on my phone as I sat by the Lake Washington house's wide windows, the evergreens outside swaying in a gentle Seattle breeze. His voice had cracked, desperate. "Tyler, it's your dad. Courtney's in deep trouble, hospitalized, debts piling up. Please, we need to talk. Save your mom." I played it once, then again, letting his words sink in. My thumb hovered over the reply button before I typed 3 words: "I don't care." I hit send and set the phone face down, the lake's calm ripples reflecting the weight lifting off me. Courtney's collapse wasn't a surprise. After losing the will contest, her real estate ventures crumbled under unpaid loans. Seattle's competitive market showed no mercy. Public records I'd glanced at showed creditors seizing her condo, her name now tied to a string of failed deals. The divorce from Patrick finalized quickly, Washington's no-fault laws making it a clean split over financial disputes. Whispers in the industry painted her as reckless, her reputation shredded when a local paper ran a piece on her attempt to smear Ellis Builders. Patrick, meanwhile, had taken a low-level finance job across town, a step down from his old ambitions. I'd followed their downfall from a distance, not out of vindication, but to understand the consequences of their choices. George had seen it coming. His video had called Courtney's greed a lifelong chase for empty wins. The bastard jab from that dinner still stung, a hint at some family secret, maybe my paternity, but it didn't matter anymore. George was my family, not them. His lessons, build with purpose, value people over profit, guided me now. Running Ellis Builders consumed my days. The net zero office project wrapped successfully, earning praise from Seattle's green advocates. I met with Brian Caldwell again, finalizing a new eco-resort deal over coffee at a Fremont shop, the city's damp air sharp outside. "You're carrying George's torch," he said, signing the contract. The George Ellis Foundation grew too, funding dozens of kids through trade programs, their grateful letters piling on my desk. One wrote, "Your grandfather's legacy gave me a shot I never thought I'd have." I kept that one pinned above my computer. Amber stopped by the house one evening, bringing takeout from a Pike Place vendor. We ate on the porch, the lake shimmering under twilight. "You've changed," she said, sipping her drink. "Not just the company, you're standing taller." I nodded, the silver watch George gave me glinting on my wrist. He left me more than money. He left me his way of seeing things. Courtney's hospitalization, I later learned, stemmed from stress-induced heart palpitations, a cruel echo of George's illness. Patrick's plea was the last bridge they tried to build, but I'd spent years reaching out only to be pushed away. Their coldness at that dinner, the smirk as they shut the door, wasn't a one-off. It was who they were. I'd offered no second chances, and neither did they deserve one. Weeks later, I drove to George's grave in a quiet Seattle cemetery, the ground soft from recent rain. His headstone read simply, "George Ellis. Strength in purpose, not profit." I set a small bouquet of native wildflowers beside it, their purple hues vivid against the gray stone. You were right, I said softly. About them, about me, about everything. As I walked back to my car, the city hummed around me, fairies on the sound, the distant buzz of downtown. Losing the family I'd once chased had freed me to build my own. George's legacy wasn't just the company or the house, it was the clarity to walk away from those who'd never valued me. Have you ever had someone underestimate you only to realize their mistake too late, or learned a lesson from family that changed how you see the world? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your story.